Budget hearing for the Bureau of Administrative Adjudication. I'm Counselor Green. I'm joined by Counselor Hogan, Counselor Driscoll, Counselor Allen, and Counselor Schultz.
Hogan. It's Counselor Hogan today.
Hogan.
Yeah.
And, Leah, we'll turn it over to you to go over your budget.
All right, thank you. Good morning. I'm Leah Whitmer. I'm the Director of the Bureau of Administrative Adjudication and also the Parking Violations Bureau, which we'll get to next. I also serve as the Chief Administrative Law Judge and Supervising Hearing Examiner for both of those bureaus. I wanted to start by giving just a brief overview of both departments to lay the foundation for what we're trying to do to streamline the city's adjudication process for different areas, and then I'll get into the individual budgets at the allotted budget hearing slots. So as you're aware, the BAA is for non-compliant property code violations, and the PVB is for parking tickets. We're also exploring, as Vicki and Brad mentioned last week, a formal adjudicative process for legal set-outs, board-ups, and cleaning cuts of vacants. So as you're aware, the City Payment Center has absorbed the ticketing and collections component of those. So the next step, once we're a little more set with parking and the BAA, is to look at a more formal adjudicative process for those functions as well. So I'm kind of considering all of these to fall under a municipal violations bureau, and we physically moved over here into City Hall. We're downstairs in the old parking suite. So the BAA staff move over. We're slowly absorbing back the parking functions from the City Payment Center, and like I said, exploring other administrative adjudicative areas that may need a more formal process within the current city layout. And while each department has its own budget, the BAA is under the law department, parking is under finance, as some of those other functions may be. You know, I'm kind of trying to take a holistic approach the best I can. So one of the ways I'm doing that is to hire some staff that are crossover staff. Those will be shown, and I'll point those out on the parking budget because that has a much higher revenue source and a much higher volume of tickets. But at the same time, I've already started cross-training all BAA and parking staff so that they're able to better offer, holistic constituent services. We can cover people's lunch breaks, vacations, be open from 8 to 5 as we work to build up both of those departments. As well as, I'm training everyone in all the software. BAA, we use IPS, as you're aware, and for parking, we use AIMS. So that's kind of just the groundwork I wanted to present to you. Are there any questions on kind of a municipal violations bureau as a whole before I get into the BAA specific budget? No? All right, let's jump right into it. Okay, so just some general updates on the BAA. Like I said, we moved over back in the fall. We've talked a lot since I started the BAA on software components. I'm working closely now with the digital service team, and I think we are finally close to at least a temporary solution as the city as a whole moves forward with Office 365. I'm in regular contact with that team to come up with something just to more automate our process. Right now, as you're aware, it's very manual. The tickets are generated in Word from codes, and then they email them over to us, and the referral comes through an IPS. My office physically serves the tickets through first class and certified mail, and then we closely monitor the entire process, whether they're making a payment, requesting a hearing, or they default. So software automation would just help us move through those a little bit quicker, as well as would increase my reporting capabilities to prepare the activity indicators for today. I do all of that by hand, so if we had something like right at my fingertips, I'd be better able to say like, hey, this is the breakdown of these cases. Just looking at these this morning, as Tim can attest, my math skills are not incredible since I'm a lawyer. So I'm really looking forward to something with that. Additionally, the back end of the process, which came up a little bit, I know, in the law department hearing when we talk about, what's kind of the end game here. We've talked about, I'm finally at a point where we're able to start filing judgments and liens. As you may recall, we are having some issues with which court locally to file those judgments with so that we can enforce it as a lien. I'm happy to report that City Court and myself have come to an agreement on how do we go about that. Unfortunately, we do have to pay the $51 filing fee to be able to do so, but we've kind of come up with a creative solution where we can bundle violations and multiple levels of tickets together. So for instance, if Counselor Allen was ticketed for failure to apply for a rental registry, that's a $50 ticket. She defaults, a $50 penalty is added. That's a default decision in order for $100. I'm not going to spend $51 to file a $100 judgment. But if she gets 5 rounds of those because she doesn't comply and ever apply for the rental registry, I've worked with City Court to be able to file one judgment that includes each of those default decision and orders, so we just pay the $51 once. And that's something that as soon as we have the capacity to do that, we're ready to roll that out. So since I came back from leave at the end of 2021, I've been largely focusing on absorbing the Parking Violations Bureau from the parking responsibilities from the City Payment Center. We're working on bringing on some additional temporary staff for that, which I'll talk about at the next hearing. But, you know, once I'm in that place, my next goal is to roll out that judgment filing process. And since the questions, continued questions against about the rolling onto the taxes came up at the law hearing and at the codes hearing, and probably I think it came up in finance as well. We have formed a new working group that's pulling Sue in onto that conversation, as well as, you know, people from codes, MBD, and finance to just explore one, you know, whether it is time to increase the fines and penalties for the BAA. You may also recall I was hesitant to do that last year because of the constraints with the eviction moratorium. But now that that's opened up, it's something I think we can reevaluate. And then 2, what ways can we get creative about rolling it onto the taxes, assuming there's still no response from the judgment and lien. Obviously, I think once we start filing judgments and liens, I think that'll prompt more people to respond and comply with the underlying violations, pay the fines, request a hearing, but then there'll still be those that nothing happens, right? And the lien is great in that it's placed on there, so if they try to sell, they're either selling it conditional to that lien, or the lien is being paid off as part of the sale. But for those people that aren't looking to sell, it's just a lien on the property. So if we are able to explore additional ways to try and roll it on the taxes, I think that'll help kind of bring us full circle with the process and have it fully built out. And then I think you can see from the activity indicators, there's, like Jake mentioned in his hearing, there's just been a significant increase in ticketing, which has led to an increase in all of our numbers. So, you know, and that's been my goal the whole time. I know there was some resistance with the way we rolled it out at first, but I think it's doing exactly what we had hoped. And you can just see that based on the, you know, continual increase year after year. And with that increase, most of my increase in the BAA budget this year is on the personal services line. And that's just, last year we added an additional paralegal. And with the 2 paralegals, as well as we've had paid interns through the City Rise grant. And the council just approved that, you know, broader expansion of the City Rise grant, which will include paid interns for the BAA. And those interns have predominantly been law students or LLM students, and they've been a big help to kind of helping us with some of the day-to-day administrative tasks, the preparation for hearings, and that's really helped us out a lot. So this year I'm looking to increase the budget line for our part-time administrative law judges, as I've absorbed the responsibilities as director of parking. I've got a little bit less time to do the hearings myself. And with the increase in tickets, that means an increase in hearings. Increase in hearings means an increase in appeals. So I'm looking to expand to bring on another part-time ALJ to help with just the underlying hearings, and then increase the hours for the appeals panel. We had on a panel yesterday where there were 4 property owners had hearings, but 2 of them had 2 separate cases, you know, and just a plethora of violations. So we were there from about 11:30 to 5. you know, to get through those cases, because depending on the number of violations, you need time. So,
Is that were you expecting that going into it?
yeah, we scheduled them every 45 minutes to give enough time for the appellant to present their case. And then for the panel, it's a panel of 3 judges to review the case afterwards and come up with a consensus. And then the way we do it right now is actually then one of the cases that didn't show up, the judge did that decision right then, you know, in real time as we were waiting for the next case, but the rest kind of go one to the other, and then they take their notes home. We circulate a draft of the decision and they email it into us. So, you know, it takes a little bit longer, but the goal is to get through all of the cases, and then they do the work remotely to get we assign, you know, each, I sat on the panel yesterday because I still have an open administrative law judge position. So the part-time administrative law judge, Ryan Hatch, he sat on my case that was appealed, and I sat on his 3 cases that were appealed. And so the other 2 administrative law judges are the ones that were assigned as like the chief judge for that purpose, and they draft them and get them into us. So overall, just again, as more hearings, more people appear. It's still not a large percentage of people that appeal, but we need the extra hours to be able to make sure we're getting through those. And we do those panels quarterly. Whereas hearings we schedule weekly, and I try to schedule the hearings within 4 to 6 weeks, closer to the 4-week range than 6-week range. But just to give people time, especially because right now all of the hearings are still remote. We've only done in-person ones for people that, you know, for lack of a better term, are technologically challenged. And don't, like one gentleman had a rotary phone, so he didn't know how to like punch in the code. So we said, okay, just come in, you know. Once we're a little bit more comfortable with the numbers locally, I plan to open it up to in-person hearings, but also continue to provide the remote option. As you're aware, we have a lot of out-of-area landlords, so I think it's a nice option. I would rather deal with the actual person responsible for the property than their local property manager. If they want to bring the property manager, that's great, but you know, you know, if they can just call in from downstate or across the country, you know, why not let them do that? I don't have a problem with that. And in addition, we have worked with codes to, we no longer require the inspectors to appear. Again, with the increased volume of hearings, it just, you know, we just switched it, but it just wasn't making sense. We were trying to schedule only 1 inspector per day, so they didn't have a hearing at 9 and then 11, so that they constantly had to pull out of the field and doing inspections. So now they can anytime somebody requests a hearing and we schedule it, we send them a fillable PDF where they can check a box that says, I'm not going to appear. I've got this additional information I want to add, and they can type it right out there. I'm not going to appear and I don't have anything additional to add, or I am going to appear. So they still have the option. So it's completely at their discretion. And then we just take in the IPS notes record into evidence. So,
quick question.
go
Did
ahead.
you say that you were adding to the administrative law judge? You're hiring more, or?
Yes, I want to. So right now I have 1 part-time administrative law judge that helps me with the underlying hearings. He's usually, right now he comes in on Tuesdays, he's doing hearings remotely right now, and then he usually is coming in on Fridays and helping with default decision and orders, because those have to be reviewed and signed by a judge. And when we get to judgments, those will also have to be reviewed and signed by a judge. And then I have an appeals panel that consists of 3 part-time administrative law judges that those just meet quarterly. Right now there is 1 vacancy on that panel because when way back during COVID for the contingency budget, we weren't doing hearings, so I cut the part-time administrative law judge, who at the time was Shadia Tadros, and then she transitioned over, you know, and got appointed at City Court. So I didn't fill it for a while, but when I went out on parental leave, I obviously had to fill it to have somebody do hearings while I was out. So Ryan Hatch was one of the appeals judges, and we moved him. He applied for the part-time judge, so he transitioned from appeal panel to part-time judge, which is, you know, more hours. And so there's still that vacancy that I have to fill. As you've heard, you know, from many other departments, but specifically the law, it's hard to find attorneys. And this has the extra layer of being incredibly part-time. So it has to be somebody that's specifically interested in that.
Is that on this page 129? Because I see one.
Yep, so it's the administrative law judges down here, the 4.
Okay, but you had 4 and you still only
The
want.
4, I think the way that we did it was just increase the hours for those. So, I mean, theoretically, I've got 1 that's part-time and 3 appeals, so that's 4 total. For the 3 appeals, we're just gonna keep it at 3, so it would just be an increase in hours for those, is where the additional funding on the personal service line comes in. And then for the 1, it could be either additional hours as long as that person is within the, part-time realm and not going over that threshold, or we could add additional ones. So it could still be 4 or the possibility of 5. Again, it's hard to fill the position, so I'll probably first just, assuming that Mr. Hatch is interested, give him more hours, and then if, I keep the postings up online, so if I get interested candidates, then I could explore adding another one.
So where do those monies reflect in here? So you have salaries that you're.
It's under the temporary services line, the 75,000. Last year it was,
Right, so that's a 35 jump, the total salary is 10 jump, and then the payments to other governments, is that part of it as well, or no?
payments to other governments is the filings of the judgment and liens in city court.
All right. It
So-
just doesn't seem like a lot of money, I don't know. It seems like,
Because they're part-time, so it's just, they're paid, Mr. Hatch, the part-time ALJ is paid at $100 an hour, and the appeals panel is $125 an hour. So I think it breaks down to, I'm asking for an extra $30,000 for the part-time and $7,500 for the appeals panel, because it's just, a couple of extra hours just in the anticipation of that bump. Going into this year, the increase in ticketing, when I did the budget last year, I wasn't planning on being out on leave, so that kind of bumped the hours up. And then, we've been collaboratively working with law and codes, how can we manage it? So some of the more cumbersome cases, problem cases like Skyline, for example, or repeat cases where they're coming through with a 4th or 5th ticket, we've been trying to push those through to the law department so they could focus on those, because I have the ability to issue civil fines and penalties, but that's it. Whereas the judges in state, supreme, and city court have more authority to force compliance.
got it, thanks.
Yep. Yep, so that's pretty much the only increases in my budget. The only other one you'll see go up slightly is the contractual and other expenses, and that's essentially just to cover the printing and all those surrounding expenses. Obviously, more tickets means more printing. We're the ones issuing and generating everything from ticket all the way through. And then additionally, it includes some printing expenses for the parking budget, because again, if we're looking at it holistically, it's one printer copier. So we do the bulk of it over in our suite, and then some of it is still printed over to the city payment center. For instance, for parking every day, Ames automatically generates reminder notices. So if you get a ticket, you physically get the ticket on your car, but then you get a series of notices advising, hey, your payment's about to go up, you need to contest it or pay. So you get several rounds of those. So because of the volume of those, they've got a much higher capacity printer copier over there. So we send those over to that suite still. So
Postage is in that as well, right?
postage is not included in any of this. The postage is included, I think, just in like the budget as a whole, like the general. Yeah, postage has never come back to me. I had it in my first year, and then nobody ever charged me for it. So I know for parking, those aren't technically served, if you will. So those get put in the bin to go to the county. For the BAA, we're physically scanning those through the mail machine for the first class and certified, and my paralegals or interns are putting them in the mail receptacle, because they have to be served by us, and then they're doing affidavits of service for those. Yeah, if you want, I can give you a brief overview of the activity indicators so you can see all the great work we've been doing.
Pardon. Yeah.
I was like, I think it's great work. Counselor Driscoll may disagree, but
That was not an intentional throat clearing.
yeah,
I was not
They have to
disgruntled.
get something off the wall.
yeah. So as Jake mentioned, you can see the increase in the volume of ticketing. You know, since I drafted this, we're at about 2,500 now. We're averaging about 250 tickets a month, which is great. There's still room for a lot of growth. You know, I got with Jake and Michelle Sapansky back in March when I was putting this, you know, finalizing the budget, and I think like open complaint cases to date at that time for codes was around 5,000, and they had referred almost 1,200 to either law or BAA, with the majority going to the BAA, and then you know, a hunk still going to law. So there's, you know, we still have a couple thousand that theoretically could be referred, and I know that codes is working like they laid out at their hearing to ensure that cases 30 days after that comply by date are either referred to the BAA or law. So
Over
yeah.
what time period was this, Leah? Sorry, I missed. Did you say
This
it was over the
was
course of the year?
Yeah, fiscal year 21 to 22, but back in the middle of March.
Okay.
You know, so I'm just highlighting that to show that, you know, that our numbers are going up, which is, you know, been the goal. And as we're building out the process and building up capacity, you know, we've been able to increase it a little bit every year, but we still have, you know, room for growth there. That, you know, the hope is that more of those cases, we're going through a lot of the backlog. So actually the appeals panel yesterday, the other judges, you know, some of the cases were only a couple of months out, whereas cases on previous appeals panels, you know, they might have been 2 or 3 years out. So it's, you know, if you're only doing these quarterly, it's a lot easier to wrap your head around. Well, obviously we should uphold this decision. This person, you know, didn't correct the violation, and here we are 2 years later. These were much quicker. So they got their notice. They didn't comply. You know, let's say again, as Jake always says, it's usually a 15-day comply by period. And then 30 days after that, they were ticketed. They got the legal warning letter in that time frame advising that, you know, if you don't comply, this could be referred to the BAA or law, and we've revamped that letter. So it's just one standard letter that is sent out so that then codes can make a determination of which department they're sending it to, but it's advising of both options in the letter and the legal ramifications of those. And then it's sent to the BAA or law. So there's still significantly more cases that can be referred. And that's why I am constantly just trying to be creative and rethink the process, such as, you know, not having the inspectors come to hearings anymore. It's just, you know, adding additional ALJs to help me with the hearing load in anticipation of things are going up. You know, next year, if we really start closing that gap, I'll probably need more administrative staff. But at this point, I think we're in a good spot, and one of the positions on the parking budget is going to be a crossover administrative aide that will be part parking, part BAA, kind of just to help with all the administrative stuff to me, and then trained to help, you know, again, on the constituent service side, just so we have total coverage and overlap, and that everybody down there, you know, again, is falling under this Municipal Violations Bureau to kind of just help with all of the adjudications. But to me, it made more sense to put it on that line, just because the revenue is so much higher on the parking side, and there's so much more volume for parking. But I'm really looking to try and be creative and, you know, have the staff cross over. So even though I have limits, you know, on the budget side, because they're under 2 different departments, I really want to move forward with it, you know, considering it as one department, and you know, still keeping track of what's falling where, but, you know, taking that approach to the department as a whole.
When you mentioned the 1,200 and the bulk of them go to BAA, would you know the exact breakdown?
I have the exact breakdown as of March 17th. There were 5,254 complaints opened by codes. 1,161 were referred. Of that, 1,124, were referred to the BAA, and 82 were referred to law.
Oh, wow, okay.
44 of those were referred to both BAA and law. So, for example, I think the data that we pulled on Skyline, one of those violations had gone through the BAA a round of ticketing, and then instead of referring it again, it was referred to the law department to file a petition.
When you say law, then it ends up in housing court.
Yes, housing court and either state supreme or city, depending on, which court is applicable.
So, it's just speculation. So do they consider the BAA, the previous problems of the BAA as far as violations go, when it gets to like city court or Supreme Court? the
Sure,
judges?
on the cases that have been through to the BAA already, usually the housing court attorneys in the law department will reach out. Everything is in IPS, so all of our notes and orders are in there, but oftentimes they'll reach out. I direct them to those orders, or they can see them and they can include that information in their petition. And it's my understanding that's what they're doing. Whether the judges over there consider or not, that's entirely at their discretion. We obviously don't have control of that, but it's my understanding that those attorneys in those courts are pointing it out, and that was kind of the logic. So if a case has gone through the BAA for 3 rounds of tickets, and then, now it's going through law isn't, or in law through housing court, they're including in their petition, information and or copies of our orders saying, we tried to settle this with them, through the BAA. They were non-responsive. The violations still exist. The violations need to be corrected. Here's that history of the BAA, and now we're coming before you to request, these measures.
Because particularly egregious examples end up with housing court, and I am totally dissatisfied with the judges, whoever the judges on housing court or the Supreme Court, as far as some of these issues go.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you do a great job. The BAA, thank God that we have the BAA, and I know that, we get a lot of satisfaction, but what happens, I'm wondering if we shorten these, what about shortening the terms? Is that something that we'd have to adjust? Like you said,
What do you mean by term?
I mean, like, okay, somebody gets violated, they get 15 days, and then they get a letter from you after 30 days, right? Is that how it works?
So right now that let's say the comply by date is 15 days out. At the point, if they don't comply, then codes is sending a legal warning letter, and then they can refer it to us. They can refer it to us at any point, but when you're looking at due process, you really do want to advise them that, hey, you have to fix this, or this will be the next step. So I think, like Jake articulated last week, their goal is 30 days from that comply by date, so about 45 days from when the violation was originally cited, give or take, right? There are outliers on both sides of that, that if they haven't complied, it'll be ticketed. Once it's ticketed, the ticket goes to us. Right now, we're completely caught up, so I think my paralegal just got 10 tickets this morning. Those will all be served today, so there's really no lag time on our end. Sometimes, there's a little bit more of a lag, and then the respondent property owner then has 30 days to enter a plea. At that point, the codes end. They're still going to work the case to try and gain compliance, and a lot of them, you are getting compliance at that point, right? The initiation of the ticket is, propelling somebody to make the correction, but I don't think that there's anything you can do to speed up the front end. I mean, that's a pretty quick turnaround. When I started, a lot of the cases we were dealing with were years old, and the rental registry is a perfect example. There had been no additional step beyond the notice that you were in violation for those.
Well, we have 4 district counselors and 2 counselors at large here, and when we go to meetings,
Yeah.
the people in the neighborhoods, they don't understand the lag time. They understand something happening at the property. And I'm not criticizing you.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to
just
give
wonder
the
if there's some
property
way
owner
we-
due process, right? You can't expect something overnight, for some of them.
Well, I've seen you at a Washington Square meeting, as a matter of fact, so you know what we go
I've
through.
been to all of them and presented
Yes.
the initiation of the BAA as well as updates.
It's
yeah.
all about speed with them.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if there's anything we can do legislatively to speed up the process.
I don't believe that the process could be sped up. I think that, like I said, there's still a couple thousand violations that aren't being referred anywhere, but that's the goal. And, I think that Jake and his team are working to ensure that more are getting referred to the BAA or law, and then obviously a percentage of those are people that are working with codes and working to make the repairs. Something like painting the exterior of a house, that's going to take a little bit more time. Getting contractors right now takes a little bit more time. So if they're in communication and have a good working relationship at the moment, codes isn't going to refer the case. That being said, if that relationship changes or progress is continually not being made, they always have the ability to do so. So I think we're on the right track, and it's a great plan. And that our numbers show that it's what's been happening year after year. We're folding in more and more violations, getting through that backlog of significantly older complaints and folding in the newer ones being referred in that quicker time period that you're asking about.
And certainly if there's a way to add onto taxes, that would be, that's a great solution to a lot of
Yeah,
issues.
I'm not guaranteeing it at this point.
No, I
I'm
know it's a
saying
difficult thing. I
that
know
we're
it's-
continuing to explore it. We're aware it's something everybody wants. It's just
That's going to require the state legislation, though, right?
Yep.
I mean, the state legislation is not, like we've talked about, directly applicable to what we need it to look like. So yeah, we're going to explore everything. Can we get creative in any other ways, to try and, that
that-
option is on the table as well. But what other options do we
That
have?
was the opinion of the former corporation counsel, that she wasn't comfortable with the state legislation, correct?
Correct. That's my opinion as well. Yeah.
Your opinion too, okay.
Yeah, there's
Because it is a state legislation saying you can do that, but
there's loads of provisions, like it's got to be like 20% of the value of the home or something. It's still
5%.
5%, yeah, but it only,
Violations can't be corrected. And it was, right, when you have the foreclosure process for taxes across the state is very different from municipality to municipality. So some have a judicial foreclosure option, similar to residential mortgage foreclosures, that go through the court process. We don't have that here. So it was kind of drafted, with that underlying process in mind, and that it's not applicable to Syracuse as a municipality. So, which can be the problem sometimes when, you're a state as a whole and you've got state legislation, but each municipality does its own thing, for different, the way they roll out different processes.
yeah, they said only like a dozen houses qualified, right?
Yeah,
So-
yeah. We went through and, we spent the time and worked with Karen Felice and the law housing team and went through, and the ones that actually qualify, it was very few of them. And I think we had multiple calls where you were on, Counselor.
Yeah.
And there's just not few that like she went through all of the ones that could qualify, and there were like one or two that weren't owner occupied. And even when you add in owner occupied, it was still under a dozen.
so there's no home rule carve out we could consider or something like that?
I mean, we created the working group, so I think as soon as everybody gets through their budget hearings, that's the next step, is to get a meeting on the books with the new group, which, we have discussed extensively in the past with multiple counselors, including, I think Counselor Driscoll was part of that group on the last go around. So circle back and what other ways can we get creative and explore this? And again, I think a first step for me is to move forward with that judgment and lien process.
Yeah.
To see what, does that, kind of each step in the process gets more people to comply, right? You get the violation notice, some of them comply. You get the BAA ticket, more comply. The default from the BAA, more comply. So then if you fold in, now they're getting a judgment, more will comply for that. We do have people right now, who reach out at the time they're trying to sell, just thinking that the default essentially is a judgment already, and that we'll pay it off. So I think that'll push us more towards the right direction and kind of bring our numbers a little bit closer together. If we jump back to the numbers, just what's being assessed versus what's being collected. We're going up, which I'm happy about, but there's still a big gap, right? So total fines and penalties assessed so far to date was just under $500,000. And then what we've collected, if you jump down to the very bottom, was just over 100,000. Since I drafted this, we've gone up. We're almost to 140,000, but there's still a gap there. But I think that when we file the judgments, that'll close that gap a little bit.
Could you, could you have one of those interns that you're gonna get?
Yeah.
Just to break down those percentages you just mentioned? Like right from the inception, all the steps along the way, and how as far as compliance goes?
The compliance component gets tricky just because of the limitations of IPS. So to break down compliance, you need someone like Michelle to do that. And even then, it's so when you're looking in IPS, unless you go into the individual case, it gets hard to tell whether or not there was compliance. I can definitely connect with Michelle and Jake and
Just like
see
a ballpark?
if we have the ability, but it's not something that I can just pull a report in IPS, or even without having an intern go through and open each individual, of the over 2,000 cases. Like, an intern wouldn't be able to help with that, but it's on my radar. I would love to know the exact compliance rates, and I think it's something we can
We'd like to see if.
drill down on. Yep,
How this thing
and
works.
report back. Yep, absolutely.
Maybe API could help.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
if I could just have a quick one. So
Yeah,
when
go
you
ahead.
said that there was, about 5,000 code cases altogether,
Mm-hmm.
and then about 1,200 go to you,
Mm-hmm.
in that ballpark, and you said the goal is to increase. What would the increase be? Would you want to take on like 1,000 more, or, ideally, would it be to take all of them eventually, or?
My ultimate goal would be that all cases that don't get compliance at some point are being referred to either the BAA or law. I think that
So the 5,000 is the overall, that's not those that aren't compliant. Is
those are the total complaints that were issued. So some of those are, being
some
closed
people,
out.
maybe
Yeah.
half of those people will
Some are
become
being,
compliant.
some are
yeah.
being satisfied. And so I think to really make the BAA the effective tool that we want it to be, you have to be almost referring every case in which there's no compliance and no communication
Yeah.
and no forward progress. It's kind of why, slowly the rental registry percentage of compliance is increasing, right? We started with a very low percentage, but there was no consequence to not applying. Why would you apply? If I had been a landlord, why would I give you my money if nobody's going to penalize me for not applying, right? But it is the local law that you have to apply, and now we're enforcing that by, if you don't, you're going to get a ticket. So you slowly, as we're ticketing more and more people for that and keep up with that every 3 years, people know that they have to do it. I have a lot of hearings with people that, well, I always just talked to codes before, and I've never had an issue. Well, okay, but you didn't comply. Here we are now, and I end every hearing, if it's my first time with somebody or some of these property owners multiple times, I say, this is the new process, right? If you don't comply, you're at risk of being ticketed. And if people haven't fixed the underlying violations, I advise that if you don't fix it, codes can issue the subsequent ticket at the higher fine amount, regardless of what my determination is today. Even if I dismiss or reduce the underlying fine or penalty, it could go back to codes and they could issue a new ticket, right? And the circumstances could be different for that second round. So I advise everybody of that. So I think by bridging that gap, that helps everybody know that this is the new way that we're handling non-compliant property code violations. You will be ticketed. If you disagree with that ticket, or you think that codes didn't allow you the time to fix the violation, you can request a hearing and contest it through that administrative process.
Having been on the council before the BAA was created, this is just a huge step. And I think the goal is landlords that are chronic violators become fearful of you. Fearful of dealing with BAA and having fines and having to pay fines and having liens on their property, which means they can't sell their property until the liens are satisfied. I mean, that's the goal. And so far, I think we're ramping up to that goal. So, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And what would you say, do you feel, I remember when BAA started, it was just basically Leah at a desk. and yeah. And it always seemed to me like, I think for all of us, as Councilor Hogan said, this is the stuff you hear the most about as a counselor, especially, community meetings and stuff, people complaining about a vacant house or blah, 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 a house that's not being kept up. So it's always been a priority for us, but it does sound from your data that you guys are able to deal with the capacity that you're having now. I mean, how do you feel? I guess just generally asking questions about capacity staff. I know you're asking for one more, but do you feel like with that one more, you're comfortable with the level of capacity you have with your staffing? Or, I mean, for me, it was always something that I thought we should throw, but I mean, I guess it's every city department. You feel like you should throw a few more people and pay them a little bit more.
Yeah.
Everybody
Sure.
here.
So, you know, I think that what I'm asking for right now satisfies the need for right now. Next year could be different. If there's a large, you know, if we are taking on a couple thousand more tickets and we're rolling out the judgment process, you know, we may need additional. I'm asking for that one additional crossover position to kind of help with some of the back end administrative stuff, you know, and it would not, I'd be asking for more additional staff, but for the interns. Really, I've always had 2 to 3 interns that, you know, through the semester right now, I have 3 that come in each at least 1 day a week. In the summers, usually I do 3 all the way at the part-time max, which is like right around 29 hours a week. And that's how we get by. And it's been great. We've had the AG City Rise grant for the past couple years, and we got off to a slow start and then a delay there due to COVID. So they've let us extend that out. And so you know, would I be able to bring on interns if they were unpaid as successfully? Probably not. You know, so the issue now is that I have paid BAA interns, but I have unpaid parking interns I'm trying to bring on. So, you know, that becomes challenging. In and of itself, but, you know, still, so I'm trying to bring on unpaid parking, but then, you know, as many other departments experience, at some point it just becomes a physical capacity issue down there, right? By moving over here, we got a little bit of additional space, but I still need to bring on multiple parking staff, which we'll go through next, that's gonna fill out that space quickly. So it's kind of rotating interns, you know, to make sure that we have enough space for full-time staff. So we're quickly even outgrowing that space that we're in down there. So I think, like Sue said well in her hearing last week, that, you know, when you're factoring in the budget as a whole, you know, in a perfect world with endless amounts of money, sure, I'd take more people and, you know, we could get through those judgments. I have, you know, thousands of judgments that need to be filed. But I'm mindful of, you know, other departments and their budgets. And I think, you know, with what I'm asking for, it gives us a good jump on it. And then, as I've done every year since I've started, we'll reevaluate, you know, and I'm very confident in asking for what I think I need at that moment, as I think Tim can attest to.
The one thing I would say is, if you just look at the bottom line of the BAA, it goes from like 120,000 to 290,000 to 355,000. I think that's the type of growth that Leah needs, and it will probably continue to grow. And the thing that you don't necessarily see that comes up in this is the revenue side. So her BAA revenue is going up by $100,000 this year. The rental registry fees are also going up. That's certainly in part due to the existence of a BAA. So I think there's going to be this growth that will continue but it has to be at a rate that is able to be implemented. And then there'll probably be, and I think that growth will be able to be paid with revenue growth. And then eventually I think you reach kind of a saturation point, and maybe that's the point where net the BAA is maybe bringing in money, but that's kind of the way I see the big picture.
What's particularly illuminating for me is when I compare the housing court calendar and the activity in the BAA calendar. Because the
Yeah, and
housing
so-
court calendar usually has adjourned quite a bit.
Yeah.
Your calendar's full of action.
Yeah, and one, you know, I know that was a big concern of yours and some of the other counselors. So a lot of our prior adjournments were with LLCs who, we gave them adjournment because in order for an LLC to appear, they have to provide an affidavit, with corresponding documents showing that whoever the physical person appearing is has authority to appear on behalf of that LLC, right? Because an LLC is just an entity, or if they're a corporation. So if Councilor Green is the member or partner or principal of that LLC, I want documentation to show me that he has the illegal authority to do so before, you know, a decision or agreement is entered on that case. So we had a lot of adjournments before because they didn't provide it. And I, give people the benefit of the doubt. I'll give you one adjournment to do so. Well, now we've had a couple of repeat offender LLCs that we are just wasting incredible amounts of time scheduling the hearings for them just not to appear because the local property manager just couldn't get the LLC from the overseas owner. So we require that now. If you request a hearing, Councilor Green, as the owner of the LLC requests a hearing, we require the LLC affidavit and supporting documentation before scheduling the hearing. So we give you 30 days to provide it. If you don't provide it, we're never going to schedule it, and my staff is not going to put in the effort to prep that case for a hearing, because there's a lot of effort that goes on the front end that my staff do, especially if it's a case, with 2 different complaints, each with 20 violations, right? When I sit down as the ALJ determining that case, they've got it all scripted out and overviewed for me so that, an evidence packet. So we do that. So that's cut down on the majority of our adjournments. Sometimes, especially COVID, illness, we do provide some adjournments, and the ordinance outlines that up to 2 can be granted, at the discretion of the director. So those requests are reviewed by me, but you don't see the constant adjournments of the LLC now.
So when you can't prove that the person is officially, what happens to those violations? They go away, or you can?
We issue a default decision in order. It's as if they didn't appear. So if they in the
They're
case
held accountable, they just don't go through the hearing.
that we wouldn't hold the hearing, we would default them on the hearing. Yep. And then they could appeal that, and it would go to our appeals panel. But in order to appeal, you have to pay the full amount due plus a $10 non-refundable processing fee that's held in escrow. And then based on the determination of the appeals panel, it or whatever is deemed reimbursable would get reimbursed, or if the appeals panel upholds the underlying decision, it's transferred over to our general fund.
Other questions? Okay.
Well, I just want to say commend you and your squad, Leah, because I know, like I said, when you first came in, it was Leah to desk, and you've definitely been the champion of this from the beginning, and I know it's an important issue to all of us, so we appreciate all the work you do.
Thank you.
All right, we'll close this and then come back